So my name is Olga Pogrebenik. I'm a Ukrainian advocate and also qualified solicitor in England and Wales. And actually, I'm someone who also studied in the UK. So I have the full overview of the whole process of qualification in England and Wales. And also I run a course since 2018, preparatory course for the same qualification exam. It a little bit changed, but I'll tell you during this session all the details about that. So, in order to start, the first point should be that you may know that there are different sort of lawyers in the UK. There are barristers and there are solicitors. There's also such a kind of lawyer, so it's not really, it's an odd qualification, something very hard to compare. With Ukraine, it's called legal executives. We're not going to cover that point here. What is the difference between barristers and solicitors? So barristers are lawyers who practice in the courts, in the higher courts. They are a little bit differently regulated employment-wise, and it's more advocacy-related profession. While solicitors, they also practice in the courts, but lower courts compared to the barristers. In order to practice in the higher courts, same level as barristers, solicitors need to pass additional exam. It's called higher rights of audience for the moment. We will focus today on solicitors qualification. And as a starting point, I must say that the route to qualify in England changed recently. So previously, there have been several ways to make it. Now it is basically a transitional period to a single one route to qualify in England as a solicitor. And what is interesting about this reform, that it's quite a novelty in general terms in the education. Basically, it says you don't have to have a law degree in order to become a solicitor. You just need to have any degree. For example, those of you, my friends, who do not have a law degree, but for example, someone who may have a degree, I think in linguistics, I think I've seen something like that from the form you've completed. So it's not a barrier for you. So it doesn't matter which degree. The second requirement for that particular qualification is that you need to obtain 2 years of qualifying work experience. The good news for advocates, for those who are qualified as Ukrainian advocates, that this requirement you already met. So it's like automatically granted because you are an advocate. If you are qualified in any other jurisdiction, you don't have to prove that you have this 2 years. For those of you who do not have this qualification, let me just briefly explain what it actually means, qualifying work experience. You have to be exposed to actual legal work. It doesn't have to be in the UK. It may be outside OSCEs, practices, but it must be signed off by a solicitor or compliance officer in the firm, UK's qualified solicitor. This UK qualified solicitor doesn't have to be your actual supervisor, but this person must ensure that you were exposed to a particular sort of work which solicitor faces in practice. What does it mean? For example, if you work as a paralegal and you basically do some very technical tasks like printing and things like that, that might not qualify as this experience. But if you involved in the actual practice, so for example, you meet clients, you conduct some research, you attend some meetings or courts, this sort of things, you draft something, you write something, you don't have to be exposed to all sort of these practices, but to some of them, yes. And this must be signed off by a qualified solicitor who sort of checked on that and can certify So let's very briefly, it's basically, I'm using our website, which is quite informative, and you can later on read more about everything what I'm going to tell you today. But let's very briefly cover what sort of jobs you may do in order to gain this experience. Especially this is relevant for those who now are in the UK, so you can actually start doing that right now. You don't have to wait for the assessments or any sort of enrollments. So first of all, you can work as a paralegal. Again, make sure that the work which you do is related to legal work. It can be internship or apprenticeship, which is fine. It's just if it's internship, it's usually for the short period of time. And I think there's a limit up to 4 organizations in which you should work during these 2 years. Think from this perspective. So very short internship maybe not really in your favor. Then a training contract, it's unlikely to be applicable unless you have an LPC, or we have a person here who is with LPC, and it's a little bit different case as well. It's basically halfway there. And then you can work as in-house lawyer, is fine. Actually, all of you who are advocates, obviously this requirement is already met, but still you can register in the UK as a foreign lawyer, and it gives you some sort of status as well. So check, just Google it and check, you'll find some information at the Solicitor Regulation Authority website, or SRA. This is the regulator for the solicitors. Finally, you can work as a volunteer. This is applicable to those who consider studies in the UK, in particular like LLM studies or something. Now, many universities offer this sort of possibility. They establish some sort of clinics with a free legal advice. So you can basically work there during your studies and obtain this experience. So this is something to think of now, because that's time consuming, same as language. So I think this is the starting point for everyone to think of for the moment, language and how to improve it for the actual assessment. I'm going back to our short table. And now let's consider 2 assessments. So as I said, you need to have a degree, 2 years of qualifying legal experience, or to be exempt from that because you are qualified in any other jurisdiction. And in addition to that, or as a primary requirement, you have to pass 2 assessments. And this is actually the most difficult part, obviously. So those assessments are divided into 2 parts, SQE1 and SQE2. SQE stands for Solicitor Qualifying Examination. SQE1, this is a multiple choice test. It covers a range of subjects, but let me tell you a little bit more about the subjects in general terms. So as a classical way to qualify as a solicitor, first, you had to clear a LLB or bachelor degree. And this covers mainly substantive law, like contract, tort, trust. This is quite a novelty for you. Constitutional and administrative law, EU law, legal services, like those are called substantive law. And we have something in common with that in Ukraine. And at the second stage, after LLB, people had to choose if they want to be barristers or they want to be solicitors. And if they opt to be solicitors, they had to study for another year, if it's full-time. And it's called, it's still in existence due to transition, but it's going to be closed soon. It's called Legal Practice Course. And this course covered more practical elements, or so-called practice areas. I now go to this another table to show you. Those are like procedural subjects. For example, criminal litigation. There's criminal law, which is substantive law, and there's criminal litigation, which is something what we call criminal process, or dispute resolution, which is a civil litigation. Yeah, property practice or conveyancing also is about transfer of property, and wills, intestacy, probate, very long name. This is basically about inheritance, and then business and business organizations. So those are different from substantive law. I'm going back to SQE1 in order to show you that SQE1 basically covers everything, these procedural elements and substantive law. And it's subdivided into two blocks. They also are called functional legal knowledge, just for sake of comfort, I think, because the assessment is 2 days assessment. You have it one day after another. And on the first day, you have the first block. On the second day, you have the second block. And you cannot sit it, with the gap in between. It should be as it is in one sitting, so-called. If that is to say, for example, if you sit FKL 1 or block 1 in January, you should sit the same sort of in January, you should sit the FKL 2. You can't sit it, let's say, in March when there's another sitting. If you want to find the content of those FKLs or functional legal knowledge, you just go here, opt for QLTS, SQE, FKL, so many abbreviations. You have to get used to them. And then click here for free online guidance, insert your email, agree, subscribe, and you will receive a bundle with a description, not just with the names, but with the content, with the syllabus of those areas for you to have a clue what it is actually. So coming back to the SQE1, what I was trying to say that now is structured differently, because previously, they first studied for 3 years substantive law and then 1 year procedural law. Let's put it this way. Now you have to cover everything in one go in the first assessment. And in the second assessment, SQE2, you will focus on those procedural elements, but they also will incorporate the substantive law. Like, for example, civil litigation or dispute resolution is based on some contract or tort concepts. So in this regard, your preparation for the SQE1 is basically preparation for the SQE2. And you should keep it in mind, even though it's a multiple choice question, to some extent, it's of course easier to pass than the second assessment. I will tell a little bit later about that. But you should do your best to prepare straight away, like you're preparing for the both at the same time. So you will be assessed in those two blocks of questions. In general terms, you also have only 3 attempts during 6 years. So with the previous route we had, there have been no such limit. Now you should take into account, because every attempt and failure, you will face a deduction from those attempts. So you should keep it in mind. And this assessment can be attended in many, many locations. The actual assessment provider is Kaplan, but it outsourced the actual exam itself to Pearson. You've possibly heard about that organization. So they have different centers all over the world. So it's in very different locations. SQE2, the locations are mainly in the UK, but they plan to extend it, or maybe they will move online. We don't know for the moment. So that is briefly about SQE1. What is important also to add is about the format of those multiple choice questions. They are of a very, very high standard. I've tried to draft a couple of those. It takes very long time if you meet the requirements of those questions. So it's actually even very expensive to produce it. And that is you need to keep in mind when you think about different providers. All right. So it's maybe the most valuable element of any course that can be. In addition, of course, to the materials, but you can get the materials from many, many different sources. But multiple choice question, that is something you need to keep in mind. How good is the quality of those? Also, the approach which is used by those, in those multiple choice questions is that you have to choose a single best answer. And single best answer means that there may be at least one more answer, which will be still correct. It just will be not the best, not as comprehensive, yeah? And from what I have seen, among those questions, single best can be, for example, some what we call dicta, or dicta is sort of the actual legal concept from a case, which is, given by a judge. So some sort of formula, yeah? So this dicta may be included in one of those, let's say, two correct answers. And that one which has exactly this dicta, which is very close to the answer, should be the best then, depending, of course, on the question. The questions are in the form of small sort of situations, so small cases, brief description of the facts. And you apply basically the law by choosing the single best answer out of 5 options. So this is how it works. Altogether, 2 assessments cover 360 questions, 180 in one day and the rest in another day. So that is briefly about SQE 1. The biggest challenge, of course, is actually SQE 2. And this is the assessment which is skills-based, or it's made on the basis of so-called simulations, something what we face in the practice. In the practice, what we do, and they have determined it, let me just show you, it will be just easier. I think, so if you choose skills, you will see a list of those. So it's, for example, client interview, followed up by a brief written work. It's actually in handwriting. So people who maybe are closer to the SQE2 assessment, for example, LPC graduates, they are exempt from SQE1, so they can straight away go to SQE2. So they need to practice a little bit handwriting, because it may be an issue. Then advocacy. Let me go back to the interview. So interview, it's an oral assessment. You will see a client. It's a simulated client and actor with a scenario. Your task is to ask appropriate questions in order to gain the information about his case, and then to advise based on this information. And that is not an easy task to do, trust me, because this client won't release the information easily. And you need to have very niche and specific knowledge of the law to ask very specific questions, to know already the answers, to sort of, you keep in your mind the answers in order to ask that particular question if the client has this or that, for example, So it's not, it's very, you show your knowledge by means of asking the questions. It's a very difficult assessment. Plus the client might be a little bit naughty. Another is advocacy, where you have a judge. It may be actually the real judge, and there will be no one else in the room except you and that judge, and you have a case to deliver. Legal writing, you write a letter or email. You need to know all the formalities, how it's done in England. It's very different from Ukraine. All of those activities are pretty different, to be honest. So very specific. So there's like particular style which you need to follow, and this is also assessed. So that is assessed as non-legal criteria. There's a range of those, of course. And also the content of this letter is where you assessed on the law. So basically you receive sort of a task from a partner who asked you to explain something to a client, yeah? So this is nothing like SQE1, like multiple choice question. You don't have the list of things to choose. You have to know it and identify it from the actual question, what exactly they want from you. And this partner or your supervisor, yeah, he will never tell you this is particular, this concept or that concept. They just ask you to advise, to analyze, some general things, yeah. Maybe advice on that, but it's not specific. It doesn't specifically say which concepts are really involved in that, So your task is to identify the legal issues, to explain them, to apply to the particular scenario, factual situation of your client, which is also given in this descriptive email from a partner, can be some attachment as well. And then to advise your client by providing some practical advice, or maybe by giving some options. So this is legal writing. Legal drafting, this one is assessed in different areas of law as well. So depending on the area of law, it can be, for example, you may draft some claim or a defense if it's civil litigation, or in business, it can be a range of different sort of documents as well, which we face in business. So there's more or less standard documents, and there's always at least for the QLTS, it's the precursor of the SQE, at least for QLTS, we had often something also to draft from scratch. So you need to know different rules, how to impose obligation or right. It's linked pretty well to the language skills and legal language skills, let's put it this way. So drafting. A case and matter analysis, that's basically analysis of the case. It doesn't have any specific format. It's more about knowledge, and also it's like a report to your partner. And legal research, for those who are possibly acquainted with the QLTS, I already stated this abbreviation. It's Qualified Lawyer Transfer Scheme. This is precursor of the SQE assessment and test drive. They basically tested it on foreign qualified lawyers. So with QLTS, we had to research and find information. So we have a task and we need to find how it's regulated, for example. While in SQE, you already are given the bundle which contains more than you need. There are documents which are relevant and which are irrelevant. You need to separate them. And based on that, draft your answer to the client. So it's quite linked to the language skills, to be honest. There's an element of verbal reasoning, so you need to read fast, and it might be quite complex documents, that is written in very complicated language, like with many legal terms, or even old style, So, and then to draft the answer to that and provide it to your supervisor. If we very briefly consider the marking criteria here, and that will be my point to you, my friends. So you may see this criteria. We basically joined all sort of language criteria which they described in the marking criteria into a single one. So it's clear, precise, and acceptable language. So, and if we look at all those practical assessments, so almost in all of them, except attendance note, but the attendance note, this is this handwritten work after the interview. It's also, if you write something which they cannot read, that also language related. But this is to say that language is something that you need to start working on right now, especially those who maybe struggle with that or do not have it at the appropriate level. One more thing before we move to the preparation and options. Again, you can find here more about those assessments and some other useful information, but I just want to draw your attention to reasonable adjustments. We don't have something like that in Ukraine. So reasonable adjustments, this is about people with disabilities. They may have some special arrangements for the exams. That's not just only for SQE, it's also if you are going to persuade LLM, for example. Those reasonable adjustments may be of very different nature. It depends on your issue. But for example, many people may find themselves dyslexics. And this is something obviously you feel and you possibly know, or you may suspect that you have it. For that, you need to attend a special assessment here in England, they do that. If you are a student in one of the universities, just ask in the university, they will assist you with that. They usually have those sort of arrangements. So, but that it will be helpful. Then in the exam, you will have some special adjustments of different nature again. Or people who have some issues with anxiety or maybe visual issues, they can make special arrangements for you in SQE1 or SQE2, in both of those. Going back to the preparation for the exam, in general terms, there are three main ways to prepare. Again, you have SQE1 and SQE2. Your first concern must be SQE1 unless you are exempt. Preparation for the SQE in general terms, you may consider it from three perspectives. Perspective number one, to go for university. It's actually maybe quite good option, especially for those who have money, who have assets for that. So it's more expensive, but universities give you several options. You may have just an online course for SQE1, and this one I wouldn't go for that. Why? Because it doesn't give you any degree. You know, you won't be able to say that you have a degree from that university. You can say I've attended the course, but this is too very, you know, it's not going to help you really with employment, things like that. And plus universities for SQE2, it's a very new thing for them. And in general terms, this is very novelty. They just introduced this assessment in September 2021. But if you consider having an LLM, this is a very good option if this LLM is combined with the preparation for SQE1. This is what you need. You need substantive law, like the law actual for SQE1. And then this degree may actually help you to find a job. That is related to one of the questions I've received. So actually you can find a job here in the UK without being qualified. It's just qualification gives you better opportunities and promotions. You know, you won't be dealing with English law maybe, but you can work in the field related to your expertise and maybe to the field of international law. And LLM, I know many people who got nice jobs just with LLMs. But also LLM is different from one to another. Let's say there's a group of universities which is called Russell Group. Write it down and you can then search. I think with those LLMs, you have better chances, like Oxford, for example, Cambridge, not only. So it's quite, the law firms, if you want to work in quite good law firm, they quite favorable towards that. Plus you may have certain, you know, expertise from language to your particular, you know, field of law, which you used to practice. So this may be something which they will take into account, and that may be more important for them than your qualification. And then they will just ask you to qualify in order to you know, to persuade a career in the same law firm. So that's number one thing. If you have money, that's a good option to do. And at the same time, you prepare for the assessment. Because if you go for the course, let's say online course for SQE1 with the universities, and you fail the assessment, you pay still a lot of money because it's quite expensive. It's the most expensive preparation would be university preparation. Also, the price is quite different, like from university to university. But you will be left with nothing. You know, you are going to lose your money. Even no degree, nothing. So this is about universities. Then another option would be to choose a training provider. There are many training providers. There are training providers who provide for training for the both assessments, or there are training providers who are specialized in one of those. Like we, for example, we specialized in the skills-based assessment in SQE2. We also developed a course for the SQE1, but it's not yet there. So the main training providers you've possibly heard about, they are, for example, provider from the US called Barbary. Another training provider is QLTS School. It's from QLTS Assessment. both of them actually were quite good for the first multiple choice test. And now I want to tell you about budget way to prepare. Budget way, that's if we talk about two main publishers. So those are just providers, you know. There's no University of Oxford, for example, among the universities who are specialized in SQE. They still do the things as they used to do. They don't really care much about this assessment. It looks like, for example, this is actually from this Russell group. But those universities, as I said, Oxford, for example, they produced special materials for the SQE preparation. And those materials are produced by the best professionals, you know, from Oxford, from all over the UK. The same Oxford University Press, the same publisher, was a #1, together with another one, which I'm going to show you now on the next page, was the #1 for any sort of studies. When I studied my LPC, we used Oxford University Press books with combination with the CLP. It's College of Law Publishing, it's University of Law. It's the best, written by the best people. I don't know who prepared those materials for Barbary or QTS school, but I clearly know who prepared that for those. The thing is, they don't provide any course. So it's basically you buy a book with multiple choice questions, and this is more for self-preparation. So basically you have to go through more materials, because any sort of course helps you to focus on particular things. But from my perspective, you still have to go through everything at least once, because in SQE2 you may be assessed on anything, and same in SQE1. All the knowledge can be subdivided into several groups where you should memorize certain things, for example, and certain things you need to be acquainted with, you know, and certain things you just need to understand. If it comes up in the assessment, at least you've seen it somewhere in the book, so you will be able to answer at least something. I think at least once, to be on the safe side, it's worth it to read those books at least once. So this book is subdivided also into 2 parts, and if you buy both of them, it's only £450 only. Yeah, the only problem is that the access to the book is only for 12 months. And that is the problem. You can print to some extent, but they limit number of pages which you can print. And also they give you 1,000, I think 1,200 multiple choice questions, which is the gold. That is the main thing what you actually need for this assessment. And they have many smart tools where you can compare your results against results of other people. So you can have a clue where you are as against people who are going to sit the assessment in the same date. Another publisher is this, as I said, University of Law. They also offer courses and LLMs. This is a little bit more expensive, but the book is in hard copy, so there's no limit. You know, you have the hard copy. The problem with this book is that they don't have as many questions. They have only 600 something questions, as far as I understand. I might be mistaken for any reservation purposes, but that is the problem, because I think questions are the most important thing in this preparation. So this is like sort of a budget way to prepare. It's the first stage, you know, and we now develop the course for SQE1, and I'm, you know, being Ukrainian, I would be very happy to help. Is also, you know, that we need to find at least some solution for ourselves as well, to make at least, to cover at least the expense, you know, of that help to others. But we don't yet have a full course. What we have are lecture notes in all areas of law in which you will be assessed, and they are in a very special format. The format is such that it's like tables, and you will memorize the things much easier, but it's not very super in details. And people who didn't study the law in the UK, or they didn't read this book, for them it would be very difficult. It would be about nothing, you know, but it's super concise, so then you understand the concepts. What I'm trying to say, that potentially these notes are actually guidance for your reading. So you can, for example, observe particular topic and then go to the books and read things in the books. That is cheap option. So we can sort of ascertain particular structure of that and etc. Maybe that would be not enough, especially for people who didn't study again in the UK. But the thing is, we now only develop the lectures. We don't have them yet. And I don't know how long time it's going to take, because this is done by English practicing barrister and English practicing solicitor. And I don't want to put pressure on them and, you know, to prejudice the quality. So, but maybe we can all jointly find some solution, because what you need is some sort of guidance initial and maybe an ability to answer your questions, because you'll come up with the questions during your preparation. You know, there are many ways how it's possible to rearrange it. We can make a study group where you will just communicate between each other and find, you know, the solutions to your questions in order not to, you know, involve solicitors. We have a cohort of grads, many of whom, you know, maybe will be happy to make it as a pro bono, or maybe we can find some funding or things like that. I'm just looking for the ways to help, you know. So, but that is another way to prepare, which is self-preparation. Some minimum guidance still would be required, otherwise it may take ages, and it shouldn't be spread into a very long period of time. You will be forgetting that. So I think that's enough, otherwise it will be endless. And I'll just add, the way to prepare for this SQE1 assessment, if you self-prepare, is to read the books once, make the notes, then revise those notes on several occasions. The first revision will take you a long time because it's like 15 subjects. And then second revision will be shorter, and then shorter, and then shorter. And then practice multiple choice questions just before the assessment, maybe for 1 month, depends how much time you can dedicate to that, or maybe for 1.5 months, 2 months, but just multiple choice question for you to get the logic of that. But you already have the knowledge because you read it once, you revised. We also developed an app for making, you know, a schedule of preparation. We actually sort of have it, but the developer is in Ukraine, and he is in the army, and he's about to finish it whenever he has a free moment. So this is something also I can help with. And when you move to the SQE2, I think we are the best for this particular assessment, because I passed it myself. I know everything about that. We prepared the worst categories of people, those who couldn't make it otherwise, because we haven't been a big brand, you know. And so we basically make it based on one-to-one training, like interview, advocacy, etc. We have our booking platform where students can book, you know, and schedule different assessments. And this is in brief what I was about to tell you.